What if I told you that Call of Duty and the Snake game have similar game mechanics? Sounds wild, but if you look under the hood, there's a lot of similarities. Let's get it building. In this phone, you had to press the buttons to move the snake around. We're working with smartphones here, so you gotta swipe up to go up, swipe right to go right, swipe down to go down. And that's exactly what we're gonna ask our first script to do. Now this seems to be working fine at first, but it's kind of doing the opposite of what I want to do. Like right over here, when I want it to turn right, it's going left. I figured out why though. The script I've attached to the player is actually working fine, but it's working from the perspective of the player and not from our perspective. It's kind of flipped, like a mirror image. So when we were swiping left to make the player turn left, from the player's perspective, it thought we were swiping right. So we gotta modify our script to make the player turn from the perspective of the camera. In game engines, the cameras are our eyes. Now it's working. And yes, I switched the snake to my robot. I hate snakes. Okay, let's make the bots that need to be picked up. We're gonna make the bot which needs to be picked up a prefab. Let me explain what a prefab is. Prefab is exactly what it sounds like. It's something which is already tailor-made, and whenever it's dropped into the scene, it does whatever we've instructed it to do. Now we're gonna make this prefab spawn at random positions inside the screen. Does that sound familiar to you? Just like how soldiers keep spawning inside of a map in Call of Duty. Now our phone is like a map. This is the x-axis and this is the y-axis. And any point inside the screen is defined by these two values. Now look at this point. This point has an x value of 7 and a y value of 10. That's 7 by 10. So that's how we define a point. Now we can create random positions by assigning random values to x and y. But you gotta make sure it stays between the limits. For x, it needs to stay between 0 to 10, and for y between 0 to 25. So when we generate a random value for x and y, we got ourselves a random spawn position. It's working good. Now we're going to destroy this prefab with our player. Why are we destroying it? I'll explain a little bit later. Now we have two game objects in the scene. The player is assigned a tag called player, and the prefab is assigned a tag called prefab. We gotta attach a script to the prefab saying that if a game object with tag player hits it, it needs to destroy itself. It's working good. Something getting destroyed on collision. Now what does that sound like? Now, two things need to happen at collision simultaneously. We've taken care of one half of the solution by destroying the prefab when the player collides with it. We gotta attach a new script, this time around to the player, saying that when it collides with the prefab, a new prefab needs to be spawned. Remember, simultaneously, snap. And this prefab will have a script which is attached to it saying that it needs to follow the exact path of the player. So the basic idea kind of works. We still gotta fix the following part. It's not doing what we wanted to do. Okay, I've spent quite some time trying to make the tail follow the exact path of the player. I think I might have to try a new approach. I'm gonna do something, hold on. This black thing which is following the player is just a bunch of squares following the exact path of the player. I'm just testing it to see if it follows the exact path. Let me explain what I'm doing. I have manually written a script to have 50 boxes with a constant gap to follow the exact path of the player. And it's working well. Now we're gonna modify the script and not start with 50, but start with 0. We're gonna use our tag collisions again. We're gonna ask our script to add 1 to this number when our player collides with the prefab. And for every collision, it needs to increase by 1. Cool, we got everything working great. We just need to make a small modification. Small modification. In the original game, when the player runs into its own tail, the game restarts, right? We gotta implement that. We do that by attaching a script to the player, saying that if it collides with the tailbot prefab, the game restarts. It should work, right? Right? Of course not, nothing works. For some reason, when the player collides with the pickup bots, the game keeps restarting. Let's take a closer look. What's happening here is that our tailbots in its default position is following the player, right? so it's constantly touching the player. And our script is considering that as a collision and it keeps restarting the scene. That's the problem. The good news is we've identified the problem. Now let's get creative and try to fix it. Now what we're going to do is split this player tag into 4 separate player tags. Now at any given direction, we want only one player tag to be activated. Now let's say that we swipe up. We want only this player tag to be activated and the other 3 to be deactivated. Which means that when I'm going up, the following tail bots will not be touching any of the triggers. And you apply it to all directions. So when you swipe left, only the left trigger will be activated. Swipe down, only the down trigger. Swipe right, only the right trigger. So the trigger will always be facing the direction of motion, which is what we want. It's working good. Only the assigned triggers are getting activated. You see, there's no perfect way to get to a solution, but I think it's pretty cool when you figure out these tiny workarounds. So the trigger's fine, everything's working good. Now comes the juicy part. We gotta run it on the phone. Let's go! And yes, I added bombs. Why can't I get inspired from Call of Duty? Okay, so I didn't finish this game in 24 hours. It took me 2 days. So if we're keeping score, that's 1 W and 1 L. The games are gonna get more complex. Maybe I get better, let's see. Or maybe I start bringing in better people to help me. Check out Voyagers and Explorers. It's a game about a bot which helps another damaged bot keep moving. Either ways, I'll see you guys on the next build. Prefab is exactly what it sounds like. Prefab is exactly what and it dropped into prefab is something. Prefab's